So how did you get involved with volleyball? We'll just jump right in.
With volleyball. So I remember I was probably in fifth grade, and my best friend at the time, she started playing volleyball. So we would kind of like bump back and forth, and I didn't know anything about the game, but I found it really fun. And so we ended up joining this team. It was just a rec team at like a local center here in Fort Lauderdale. And I ended up falling in love with it. Soon after that, I moved to Jacksonville, Florida. And so I had to transition to a new school and everything. And the school there didn't have volleyball. So I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, this is the game that I want to play. Like, I find it so much fun. And so I then found a local club there. It was called JJVA. And they basically taught me everything from the seventh grade. I joined a team and I was so bad. I was so bad. I was so bad to the point where I didn't even want to go in to play the game because we had tournaments and everything like that. And I just wanted to be on the team, learn the game, and that was pretty much it. And then I started to slowly get better. They saw a lot of potential in me. So I was grateful for that. And when I got to high school, I think is really when I started to develop. I went to Bishop Kenny High School in Jacksonville, and they're pretty well known for volleyball. They have an amazing coach, Coach Winkler. Shout out to her. And so she pretty much taught me everything else, and that was that.
And then what was the recruiting process like? I've talked to a lot of D1 athletes about their recruiting process, but D2 and D3 are very different. Can you kind of detail
Yeah.
when the first experience with your eventual coach was, and then how you knew that was a fit?
Yeah. So my recruiting story is a little bit different. I was a late recruit. So I started getting interest when I was a freshman, sophomore in high school, and I didn't decide I wanted to play in college until I think my senior year. And so I was kind of late in the game. So I was just trying to see what schools still had opening positions for outside hitters. And, I was then touring a bunch of different schools. I had it down to UNF, which is a D1 school in Jacksonville, Florida, but they weren't going to give me money. And then Nova Southeastern University, which is the D2 school that I ended up going to in Fort Lauderdale. And I had a lot of interest in UNF because I had friends from high school that were going there. It was very familiar. Like, I knew the area, I was close to home. And so I really liked it for those reasons. And I thought it was cool that it was D1. And so that was my number one choice. I did like Nova Southeastern University, but I didn't really feel like I would have clicked there. And so I was mainly nervous about that. But my parents ended up saying, like, that's going to be the wiser decision. They have great medical programs and great schooling there, and they're in Fort Lauderdale. My dad was there. So, and the money piece, right? So that was ultimately the smarter decision. I wasn't really happy about it at the time. But of course, I didn't say that to the coach. Of course, I, acted excited, and I was ultimately happy that I was going to be playing volleyball in college. So that was the most important part. But yeah, and then I went on a visit there. The coach was really excited. She had a lot of energy, and so I was like, okay, well, that's good. And that was my first interaction with the coach for the most part. But between like D1 and D2 recruiting, I think it's pretty much the same as far as, you go on your tour. They offer you different things. And, they show you the facilities. My school had a really nice facility. It was almost like a D1 school in that sense. So I did like that part, but yeah, everything else is pretty much the same. As far as the differences being an athlete in D2 is that, academics are their number one priority instead of in D1, they kind of own you as an athlete, and they're like, your sport comes first. So that's good because you get to spend a little more time studying. The teachers are understanding. So, yeah.
And then you were an All-American in 2017. Yes?
Yeah. Yeah.
How did that happen? Were you expecting that? I mean, that's quite an
No,
honor.
yeah. It's funny. I don't really talk about it that often just because, to give you kind of the whole context of my volleyball career, is that we were notoriously a losing team. So, yeah, I can laugh about it. I mean, I laughed about it then because I was just like, whatever, this is the situation. We were notoriously a losing team. So my freshman year, we had a pretty good season. And I was a starter right away. So I started getting, collecting accolades and things like that as a freshman. And then when our seniors graduated my freshman year, everything just started to go downhill. And so the next season, I think we were 6-25 or something like that. Yeah, really sad, really depressing. And that's also why I struggled with food, was because I sought comfort in that. I was like, I'm working so hard, playing volleyball. I'm spending so much time in this. And it sucked that I wasn't getting the result that I wanted, just to win. And I came from winning teams in high school. We won states and all of that. And so I was used to that culture. And so this was very different. It was a really hard adjustment for me. I was good. I don't even know how to say it, but I scored points, and I started getting recognition for that. And so somehow I ended up becoming an All-American on a losing team, which I don't know how that even works out, because typically like the teams on the top earn those titles. But I guess my stats were so high that I don't know, somehow it came about. I didn't even try to like really investigate it at the time. It was just kind of because I cared more about, like, I wanted to win. If I'm an All-American, if I'm all conference, if I have records and all these things, like it doesn't matter if we're not winning. The whole point to doing well is so that the team can win. And so that's just kind of how I have viewed it. And so, yeah, I don't really mention it unless I'm using it to point out that even successful athletes can struggle with all these things that I talk about. And so that's really the reason why I highlight it. But yeah, All-American is just a little piece of the puzzle.
So I really dug into the archives and found that. I didn't intend for that to be like a taboo subject at all. It was just along the lines of your life,
I know, yeah. And people, they're like, why do you view it this way? And so I try my best to explain it. But that's really the reason, is because it's just, why does it matter if I was on a losing team? So that's just my viewpoint.
And going back to the disordered eating, did that come along with the pressure to perform because you were scoring so much?
I think it had slightly to do with that. And I think it's because I had a spotlight on me. And so whether that's like using my photos for flyers or, posting it on social media. And so the disordered eating fueled my desire to look a certain way. And that was to look like a volleyball player, which at the time I was like, I need to have abs. I need to have like rock solid legs, like no body fat at all. And which isn't true. Like we see incredible athletes of all shapes and sizes. And so, but that wasn't really a conversation at the time. And so I just felt very determined and very stuck to this certain image that I had in my mind. I was like, I need to be stick thin. I can't have my legs jiggle in spandex. And it's sad too, because a lot of female athletes are very sexualized in their sport. And for reasons, we wear very small uniforms. Like, why do we even wear spandex? I'm like, what is the point of that? It just makes us self-conscious, and it hurts when we slide on the ground. I'm like, if anything, we should be wearing like leggings or something like that. But yeah, it definitely had to do with having a spotlight on me and getting kind of this attention of scoring lots of points and kills and getting these things. So I was like, wow, like now I need to really like maintain a certain image.
Do you think that those kind of scenarios where glorification happens, depending on things like uniform and type of sport, do you think that those things are glorifying disordered eating behaviors?
Oh yeah, for sure. And it starts in mainstream media, right? Because there's this idolized thinness that women are supposed to have. And it has kind of evolved into, we idolize athletes because they have these amazing physiques and they're so lean and they have these rock solid abs. And when in reality, like most athletes don't look like that. And that look does not determine their performance. And that's something that kind of got twisted in my head, because I would see these bodybuilders on Instagram and these like Fitspos, and that's what they looked like, but they weren't, having a practice a day and lifting and, performing on the weekends. And it's very different. Like you can achieve that certain aesthetic and, go about your day and whatever, but it's very different when you're trying to perform on a court and you're trying to, work along with the team, and looks have nothing to do with that component of it. So yeah, it definitely has something to do with that.
And then how did you get interested in the nutrition side of sport? Was it from personal experience, or was it just a generalized wanting to make the space less toxic?
Yeah, that part came after, like further along the timeline. I first got into nutrition because I switched my major to exercise science. I was like, the exercise science is cool, I'm gonna stick with this. And so we had some nutrition classes here and there. And so I started becoming really interested in how nutrition affected performance. Ironically, I didn't use that information to my advantage because I was so stuck in this cycle of like, I know I just need to like look good. Like I know eating more carbs will help me perform, but I'm scared that that's gonna make me gain fat. And so it was just this continuous cycle. But that's how I got interested in nutrition. And so I was like, I really like this topic. It's super interesting to me. So I decided, I'm going to make this my career path. So I started looking up the classes that I needed to take, and we didn't have a nutrition major at the time. And so I just started taking more classes about nutrition. It was very much involved in the sports nutrition realm. And it's surprising because you would think disordered eating would be a very big topic among that because it is such a prevalent issue. But the only thing that I was really introduced to was eating disorders, which is different. And so eating disorders are the clinical version of disordered eating. You start off with these disordered behaviors, and if they become very continuous, very patterned, then you might be clinically having an eating disorder. And so in my eyes, I was like, well, I'm not that severe. So, it must not be a problem. Like my behaviors are normal, and they were very normalized. So I just didn't really see it as an issue at the time. I did know that I felt very out of control around food. I didn't like how I felt around food. I thought that I just was addicted to food, and I had all these just internal problems that I was like, why can't I just overcome them? Why can't I just like push past them? So that was very much my mentality. And, as I started growing in the field, probably my senior year is when I was like, Denver, like, this is a problem. I really don't like how I'm feeling with this. But I felt stuck because volleyball is what was keeping me in this constant loop of like body dissatisfaction, using that then to, how I eat. And then, the cycle would continue. So it wasn't until after I graduated where I was like, oh, I feel free. And now I can focus on, healing my relationship with food. And that's how I kind of learned all about that.
So how many calories were you eating a day as a student athlete? I mean, were you counting? Was that something that was prioritized?
Yeah. So I did have a thing with numbers, and I talked about this not too long ago on Instagram, but I never had a role model that could show me like how much they ate. Because I'm a very tall, I'm 5'11", so I'm tall, I have muscle mass on my body, like I'm a pretty, large woman compared to relative size. So I never had that example. And so I would see people around me, I would see, fitness influencers, just any information around me telling me how much I were supposed to eat. And kind of the standard I saw was, 2,000 calories. That's, the recommended amount for everyone in the US, which, isn't really true because everyone's individual. But so I saw that and I was like, well, if that's, the average, then I definitely need to be below that. And so I saw anything at 2,000 or above as like way too high. And so I thought I needed to eat around 1,500 calories, on the high end, I thought I needed to eat 1,800. And that's when I started to kind of go into macro tracking and all of that. And I should have known better because, you put in your activity level and then it gives you a rough estimate. But I was just as an athlete, we're on the extreme level of activity. And so, we're working out constantly, we're in games, we're constantly in recovery mode. So we need a lot of food for that. But I didn't see it that way. And so I would put, lightly active or moderately active when really it should have been way higher. And so I would take that number, which was probably 2,000, 2,100. And I wanted to be in a calorie deficit because I always wanted to lose body fat and get my body fat percentage lower. And so that's why the number was so low. But I would do that regularly, which then, if what happens is when you eat so little, your body will eventually catch up and you will become so ravenous that you'll end up binging. So if you're looking at a weekly average, I was probably eating, over 2,000 calories because of the amount of food that I was eating in like one sitting when that event would happen. But I didn't realize it at the time that it was because I was just eating so little.
And then did anyone see what was happening, what you were doing while it was happening? I mean, did anyone come up to you and say like at team dinners, Denver, what's up?
No, not at all, because if anyone has an eating disorder or disordered patterns, it's very sneaky. And I didn't look like I had an eating disorder, which is, there is a stigma around it. I was weight cycling. So, during season, I would always be heavier because stress was higher. And so I was constantly, restricting, binging, which takes a toll, and, you're inflamed and all these issues happen. But before season is the summertime. And so, I was able to be really disciplined. I had no stress. And so I would always be like super leaner before my season started. And then, so I had that weight fluctuation a little bit, but, I'm fairly tall, so it kind of evens out. People don't really notice. People did notice when I got really small, my smallest. But it's so glorified that people are like, wow, like you look so great. And, how did you do that? And, so I got a lot of compliments. And so that just continues to fuel the fire. And I think it's something that it's starting to gain more traction now, where we're a little bit more concerned about athletes and disordered eating. But at the time there was zero talk about it. And so it was almost like, yeah, like it's a good thing if you look leaner. It's not something that is supposed to be investigated. And I would eat normal at dinners. We would go to Chipotle, and in my mind I was spinning my wheels thinking, oh my gosh, like I can't believe I'm going to be eating cheese and sour cream, and I can't get the rice because it's too many carbs, and I have to get the lettuce. And so all these thoughts are happening in my head, but I never showed that. So I was very good at faking this image of like, yeah, like I'm super healthy and this and that, when really like inside my head I was suffering. So it wasn't something that people would have been able to point out. It was something that, and people who suffer from binge eating and kind of eating this compulsive type eating, they do it in private. So a lot of times I would eat in my room. When I was a freshman and I had a roommate, that was a little bit harder. So I would, eat when she wasn't there, eat in my car, like things like that. And so it could be pretty secretive and kind of dark, which is why a lot of people don't recognize it.
How much smaller than your average were you at your smallest?
I think
But it was so recognizable.
Yeah. So when I got my smallest, I had a back injury. And so over Christmas break, I wasn't working out. And so I was losing muscle mass too. And because I wasn't working out, it was easier to restrict my food intake because I wasn't as hungry. And so the combination of the two, of the inactivity of losing muscle and the not eating, I just shrunk like really small. And compared to what I am now, like I look back at the photos, I'm like, oh my gosh, like how did, I look so unhealthy there. And I really was just striving to be anorexic, which is so mentally terrible. It's terrible. But in my head, it's what I was striving for. And so I probably weighed 15, 20 pounds less than what I weigh now. And my body fat percentage was lower, but because I had lost muscle mass, it wasn't as low as I wanted it to, which then drove me to want to be skinnier. I was like, well, if I'm this thin and my body fat percentage is still this, I was like, then I need to do it more, and I need to get smaller. And so it was just constant cycle. And that's why I think it's a good thing that they do body composition as athletes, but we did it so often. We did it almost 3 times a year. And so the numbers just really played in my head. And it was just this game. I was like, I need to get it lower. I need to get it lower. I need to get it lower. And even, our strength coach at the time, he was like, no, like you're in the healthy range. Like this is a good thing. It didn't matter in my head because I couldn't think logically for myself. So in my head, he couldn't relate to the things that I was struggling with. And so I was like, yeah, like I know I'm in the healthy range, but I want to look this way. And I couldn't obviously say that to him. So yeah, it was a mental struggle.
Was there ever a dietitian that worked with your team that was kind of trying to promote healthy eating habits? Or were you just really on your own when it came to consumption?
Yeah, so we have a university dietitian. So she works with the athletes and the students. And she would come and give us presentations in the beginning of our season and tell us, this is how you can bring food with you. This is how you should plan your meals. This is, all the basic healthy things that we should do as athletes. But in my head, I already knew these things. I knew how athletes should eat. That's why I was originally interested in nutrition, but I couldn't do it for myself. And myself, like my goal was to look good in spandex. And, I can't do that if I'm eating carbs all the time. I can't do that if I'm eating these calorie dense foods. And so I was constantly trying to eat as little as possible. And it was something that like, I couldn't overcome because I had this fear of fat, like gaining fat. And it was something where I didn't even think she would be able to help me with that, which is why I was so stuck. If I thought that maybe, they dealt with these types of issues, then maybe I would have sought out help. But in my eyes, I was like, I'm the only one struggling with this. And I felt very alone in that. So
When did your disordered eating kind of come to a head? Was there a situation, a conversation that happened where you kind of had an epiphany and said, oh my gosh, this is the cycle I'm in, help?
yeah. So the turning point when I was just started to creep the corner was when I moved in with my roommates my junior and senior year. So Kim and Sam, they're sisters, and great roommates. So they were very much, I would consider normal eaters, right? So they would eat when they're hungry, stop when they're full. They had a variety of different snacks, and they ate cereal, they had coffee creamer, they had cookies and pasta and rice, and all these foods that I would restrict. And so watching them eat, I was like, why am I so strict? And it's not even that my body was even really changing that much with these restricted foods, which I now know is because my body was so stressed out, and it was just trying to hold on, right? Because I was giving it so little. And so it then just started to catch my attention, and because I was around it so often, I was like, oh, like, maybe I can start adding coffee creamer into my coffee. And because I would only add like protein powder to my coffee because I had this obsession with protein. I was like, oh, as long as I eat protein, like I won't gain fat. And which, there's a whole conversation around that. But so that was the first step. I remember I started using their coffee creamer. I was like, hey, like, can I try your coffee creamer? And I started using it, and then I realized I was like, wow, like nothing's happening to me. My body's not changing just because of that. And so it started with that. And I would order these Starbucks drinks here and there that had like the normal sugar in it, and the normal lattes, and I wasn't so obsessive over it. And so it started with that, but I was still very restrictive with my grocery shopping, and still very selective with the foods that I was eating. And but I would end up sneaking some of their food. So my roommate always had mini wheats, and I was like, oh my gosh, like there's so many carbs. So like, how are you eating these? And this is inside my head. I would not say that out loud. And so when I became really ravenous at night, I was like, let me just have like a few mini wheats. And I feel so guilty about it, because not only was I breaking my food rules, but I was stealing food from my roommates. And so it was so shameful. But I still wasn't to the point where I could start buying those things on my own. But the real turning point was literally the day after our season ended my senior year, was when I felt so free, unbelievably free. I went to the store. I remember the next week we started just moving our bodies to feel good. I didn't have this pressure to like try to maintain this certain aesthetic or anything. I was like, let's just move to feel good. And then I was like, now I can incorporate, these nutrition things that work for sports nutrition. And so I was like, what, carbs are really great for your workout. So I'm going to go get some cereal. And I started eating cereal before my workouts and after my workouts. And I was like, this is so amazing. And it was honestly the day after my volleyball career ended is where I was like, now I can be free. So it's pretty crazy how I felt so stuck just because of the sport. But I think that's why I resented it so much after I graduated, was because it just like kept me in this constant cycle. And it wasn't until the day it all ended where I was able to fix all my issues.
Did you tell your roommates that all of this was happening and that they were essentially the catalyst
So
to changing
they,
this behavior for you?
yeah, they know now. Because I'll bring it up every now and then. I'm like, remember when I used to just like I couldn't even use coffee creamer and you guys helped me use coffee creamer. And so yeah, we talk about it now. And how now I buy Many Ways. Many Ways are my favorite cereal now. And so I'll buy like a whole box of it from Costco. And I'm like, Kim, remember when I used to steal your mini wheats? And so yeah, so they do know it. And we still keep in touch and everything. They live away now, but they were definitely a big part of my turning point.
Were you kind of in a state of shock when sport ended and you no longer had those restrictions, whether self-imposed or otherwise, on you?
Yeah, it was a good shock because I was so ready to just not be a part of that anymore. And I had, that relationship with the losing part. We were constantly losing and I hated it. And it was like, I'm doing all these things to maintain a certain image. And in my volleyball career, we're not even winning, and so it was just this huge negative association with volleyball. And so I didn't really have that typical, finding your identity after sport and, who am I? Because I'm not a volleyball. I very much wanted to detach myself as being a volleyball player, just because I had all those negative associations. So I was in shock in that way, where I was like, now I get to focus on recovery, and I didn't go the natural, it was a natural way, but I guess the right way, which is to seek help and go with a registered dietitian. But I did intern for an eating disorder dietitian, and so through that I was learning. And she introduced me to the intuitive eating book, and so I started reading that, which is basically a book to help you rebuild your relationship with your food and body. And that's what I needed. So I found it really life-changing. And I was at the point where I was so ready to, have a good relationship with food that I didn't need that extra help. I was able to kind of fix my own issues at the time. Because I think that piece of, acceptance of, I need to be better and fix my issues, I think that's the hardest part. And so having someone help you with that piece is really important. But I think I was already past that. So it was just a matter of like practicing it on my own. And I started following all these dietitians on Instagram that help with your relationship with food and intuitive eating. And I started learning all about these things. And so that's really how I started my recovery process. And it's went really well, and I was doing it for probably a year or so, and here I am today.
What was the chasm between the calories you were eating and then once you stopped volleyball, the calories you were eating then?
Yeah, so I stopped tracking because a part of intuitive eating is trying to rebuild your hunger cues and fullness cues, and really trying to listen to that. And that was a huge thing for me because I felt like I needed to reject my hunger. And I had this notebook in college. I posted it on Instagram, but I would literally write down weekly. I'm like, if you're hungry, you need to do 10 push-ups. Or if you feel like snacking, you need to go do 100 sit-ups. And that was part of my attempt to try to reject my hunger. And so that was a big piece for me. And I just started slowly introducing the foods that I always restricted. I started eating, instead of the quarter cup of oatmeal that I tried to call a breakfast, I started eating, a full serving. And I started adding toppings to it because, that's a part of the satisfaction piece and how you feel okay after a meal and not wanting to binge later on. And so all these things just started to build upon each other. And there were times where, I did still feel out of control around food, but I would work really hard to investigate that. And it always ended up being that, I wasn't eating enough. So it kind of becomes this problem where if you're restricting, eventually your body's going to catch up to you and it's going to have all these intense cravings, and then you're going to end up raiding the pantry. So it was a learning process, but I kept to it. And a part of the process, though, is to, you have to reject diet culture. So you have to stop tracking your calories. You have to stop looking at nutrition labels. And in my mind, I had a pretty solid foundation of knowledge around food. So I knew how to do the basics, include a protein, include a carb, include a fat. But I wasn't tracking how much it was. It was strictly off of, do I feel hungry right now? Do I feel full? And that was how I would eat. And so after about a year and a half of that, this past year is when I started tracking my food again. And that's really because I had a solid relationship with food, and I'm still very much into sports nutrition. So, I love working out and I love building muscle, and whether it's to be strong, whether it's for a certain type of physique, I think all of it is really cool how we can manipulate that. And so when I felt comfortable with my relationship with food, I was like, okay, well, what I won't feel differently about my body if I gain weight, lose weight. Like, I feel very neutral about my body. I don't care as much, I don't have to try to look good on a volleyball court anymore. And so that's really what allowed me to kind of experiment with these things. And I was like, how much food do I really need to be eating? And that's when I started tracking my food, and I ended up eating way more than I ever imagined. And so I was eating 3,000 calories this past year, which is a lot for, a female. And, it's more than people ever expect. So, I started doing that, and it just made me realize how much I should have been eating as an athlete, because it was not even close to that.
And then I had an episode probably half a year ago with a college athlete who was playing 2 Division I sports, and she developed disordered eating because she felt the pressure to just perform constantly. And she said, and you said it as well, and that's why I'm kind of telling this anecdote, but she was like, she went through the journey to unlatch the emotion from food that she had. And she was like, I worked so hard to find this neutral feeling with food. And as the interviewer, I was like, okay, like a neutral, but it was so interesting that she had used that word and then you just used it as well.
Mhm.
How does one cultivate a neutral feeling toward food?
I would say, in my opinion, at least, it starts with a neutral feeling around your body, because typically people have these negative associations with food because we're told they affect our body. And so, most of our society is very fat phobic. There's all these messages saying, if you eat this food, you're going to get fat. And so that's kind of where it stems from, is our bodies. And so that's what I worked really hard on, was, achieving this body neutrality, because I was so obsessed with trying to change my body and change my body fat percentage to attain this certain look, that as soon as I stopped volleyball, I was like, wow, like now I felt very neutral about my body. I didn't care as much how it looked. I never had to put on spandex again. And that's when I was able to feel more neutral around food as well, because we are told from a very young age that, there's these good foods and then there's these bad foods. And so if you eat the bad foods, you should feel really guilty and bad about yourself. And, you're a horrible person. When, if you look at it very logically, there's no morality to food, right? And so we shouldn't feel guilty around these things. More when we look at food, we should look at it from a nutritional standpoint. Some foods are more nutritious than others. Some foods offer us different things. And if you're looking at a piece of broccoli versus a cookie, they both have benefits. And the cookie offers you satisfaction. It offers you connection with others. And the broccoli offers you, all these nutrition properties that are great for your health, but you can have both of them, right? And so it's the neutrality comes from feeling neutral about your body first, and then you can then realize that you can include all foods in your diet and be healthy at the same time. But learning about the different qualities of food can help you kind of navigate that.
Is there a trend, just more generally, once athletes quit their sport or age out or what have you, walk away, that the caloric intake then becomes a problem because they're stuck in this rapid eating phase that they needed to maintain their elite performance, but now that they're not an athlete, it's gonna catch up to them?
Yeah, so I don't have any personal experience with people with that, but there does tend to be a trend among football players. So, I worked as an intern for University of Miami with their football team, and these guys eat so much food because they're constantly working out, they're trying to build muscle, they're trying to recover, all the things that, normal athletes do, but on an even greater level, because these are really big guys, and the bigger you are, the more food that you need. And so we were constantly making them sandwiches. We would put ice cream in their shakes and just as many calories as possible because they really needed that energy. And so it does come to a point with these athletes that, after their sport, after they retire, or even throughout injury, they don't have that connection with their hunger cues and their fullness cues because they're just always told to eat. And my boyfriend says the same thing. He was a baseball player. And so all throughout his career, the message to him was, you need to eat as much as possible, eat as much as possible. And so they never have that connection of like, I am now full. It was always just clean your plate and wait until the next meal, so it does become an issue in normal life when you transition into that part, because you need to rebuild that connection, between, I see a plate of food and I don't need to eat all of it. I really just need to ask myself, how do I feel? Am I satisfied yet? Do I have other things going on in the day where I'm going to need a little extra fuel? So it's really about, you need to be aware of it first before you can start to kind of address the issue. But yeah, it can be a trend for a lot of different athletes.
And then going kind of along that path, what kind of cues, you mentioned a couple of them just now, but what kind of cues can former student athletes look for within their body to navigate post-sport eating behaviors?
So I would say it's paying attention to your body is the first step, because there are different cues. So for example, when you're hungry, you might experience some brain fog. It might be a little bit difficult to focus, and people may not experience that tummy growling, that stomach growling. And so they may want to pay attention to how they're feeling mentally. And, is it hard to focus right now? When's the last time that I ate? You should typically eat something every 3 to 4 hours. So that's a nice guideline to have. And so you can set an alarm, for example, every 4 hours. How am I feeling mentally? Do I have any brain fog? Is it hard to focus? How does my stomach feel? Do I feel kind of cramping, or do I feel any growling. And so kind of asking yourself those questions and paying attention to your body to see what signals you do feel can help. Some people get a little bit shaky. Some people get lightheaded. And so that's a good way to navigate whether you're hungry or not. And then when you're full, it's this conversation piece back and forth with your brain and your body. So it does come from asking a lot of questions, and people don't necessarily like to do that because it takes work. And when you're eating, you just want to eat and get it over with. But you can learn a lot from the process, which is why I really encourage it. And you can start by asking yourself, how do I feel? Halfway through the meal, you might want to take a sip of water and be like, okay, like, how am I feeling on a scale of 1 to 10? There's a scale online that you can look at, and it kind of tells you this different range of, there's this middle ground of being satisfied with where you're at. And you can ask yourself, okay, if I have one more bite of food, is that going to push me over the edge of feeling kind of uncomfortably full? Or, if I have one more bite, am I going to then feel pleasantly satisfied and I'm not going to want more food? And so it is kind of this back and forth conversation with yourself, which can be hard, but it's something that can really help people. And then, it can go further with going on with the rest of your day. Do I have the energy that I need for the next task? So maybe you notice, wow, I'm still hungry, or wow, I don't feel very energized. And that can prompt you to then question, was it enough food at your last meal? So yeah, those are just different examples of what you can do, but it is a pretty flexible process that people can do.
Is the subjectivity of food more an issue or a solution?
I think it depends on who you ask. People like structure. So it can be hard to tell people, like, it depends. And you can be very flexible with your food, but you can have structure without being too rigid by providing these certain guidelines. So like I mentioned, I think earlier, the plate method includes, do I have a protein on my plate? Do I have a carb source? Do I have a fat source? And so that can give you some structure without it being so rigid and being like, you can only have these foods and these portions. And, asking yourself these questions and having different scales of hunger and fullness can be that structure for people, while still having that individuality and kind of flexibility to meet your personal needs, because we're all different, right? So, I could tell you my best estimate of how much food you need, but it really comes down to your own, cues and your own ability to assess yourself.
And then can you kind of talk about the disordered eating that occurs in sports like volleyball, like swimming and diving, like gymnastics, like wrestling, that are tailored specifically to body type?
Yeah. So it's interesting. That topic is interesting because we do see more of disordered eating and eating disorders within weight specific sports. So weights where, the size of your body does matter, which is like wrestling, they're dieting down, they're losing all that water for their competition. And gymnastics, swimming, all the sports that you mentioned, there is that issue. And the type of disordered eating does depend. They tend to be on the side of anorexia just because the trend of their sport is to be smaller, but that can also develop into binge eating or binging neurosis. I don't know, the type of binging where you're overcompensating for the binging that you do, and so that's how they ultimately maintain their figure. So overcompensation can be through extra exercise or purging or laxative and different things like that. But we do see that trend, and although volleyball isn't weight specific and you see players of all shapes and sizes, we were still tested, body composition tested. And so that definitely played a role in my disordered eating and others as well. So it depends on the sport, but it's also kind of athletes in general because our weight and bodies are so sexualized.
Now that you're on the opposite side of sport and you're coaching these athletes, what are some cues that an athlete's going through something like disordered eating?
Yeah, so I'm not directly in the space. I do some coaching on the side. I coach some volleyball players on the side, and I always try, whether they want the information or not, I try to be a good influence on them and just throw random stories at them in case, maybe they can relate to it, whether they're willing to share with me or not. But yeah, some things that can come up are, if your athlete is rejecting food. So let's say you're offering the athlete a snack because it's after practice and they should be refueling and they reject it, kind of prompting why can be a good place to start. And like I said, disordered eating can be very silent. It can be very secretive. So it is hard to address for that reason. But athletes, whether they're being weighed or not, that can also be an indicator because, frequent fluctuations in weight can be a sign that they're restricting their food and then, they're binging and they're having these crazy weight fluctuations. So, that can be something that can prompt the conversation. There can also be, the rejection of food, or if they're eating in a public space, team meals and whatnot, kind of seeing how they eat and what they're ordering, whether they have hesitation towards eating, that can be an indicator. But it can be pretty hard because disordered eaters don't want to come across as disordered eating. So when they're in a public place, they might be just eating normally and you would never know. But those
And then
are common things.
what's your favorite part of being on the other side of the athlete experience?
Oh, my favorite part. Definitely the freedom piece in all aspects, body freedom, food freedom. I just feel so incredibly detached from who I used to be and that obsession. It was mentally draining. I couldn't focus on conversations. I couldn't focus on homework. I couldn't focus on anything besides food in my body. And so I just feel like I experienced this whole nother side to life where I can actually, pay attention to the people that I love in my life and go to events and not be so obsessive and compulsive with the food that's there and just live. Honestly, disordered eating can take so much out of you and so much mental space, so much energy. And you feel free, like you feel like balls and chains have ripped off of you and you can just fly away, experience life from a whole new level. So that's my best description.
And then why do you think that, well, I'll preface this by saying nearly every episode that I've done of this podcast has had some kind of underpinnings of athlete identity as the issue, as just a prevailing cause of whatever the athlete is going through. But you don't seem to have that issue at all. In fact, not being an athlete seems like a way better lifestyle choice for you than when you were competing.
Yeah.
Why is that?
It goes back to just all the negative associations because if we were a winning team and it was a really great experience, of course there are parts of being an athlete that I love. I miss my teammates and I miss that connection that we all had, and I miss showing up to a place and working really hard together. But it was just the whole part of being an athlete was just so stressful and so exhausting for me. And the fact that it kept me in that mental trap of trying to look a certain way was just, it was exhausting. And I couldn't be the person who I wanted to be or who I was supposed to be. And it it was exhausting. And it was all these negative associations with the sport that allowed me to just repel so far from it and go completely the other direction.
What do you think that a volleyball player would say to you right now? Like, do you think that your collegiate Denvyr would be
Oh my gosh.
excited for you, or would she be ashamed of who you've become? I mean,
Yeah, she would be so ashamed of who I am, and she would be so mind blown because the person who I was very, and this kind of ties into the culture that we have in sports and fitness, which is, no excuses, discipline over everything. Mental health is this taboo topic, which you have shed light on it, and a lot of other people. And it's just something that was never talked about. And so I very much felt like, I didn't have feelings. Everything was very like black and white. And, my food issues, it's a problem for me, but I never associated it with being like an emotional problem or like a feelings problem. It was very much like, no, this is a problem that I have, and I'm just like not disciplined enough. And I just need to try harder, and then I'll be able to overcome it. And so the fact that now I'm very like in tune with my emotions and very like willing to share with people about my experiences is something that I never did, because I was very closed off. I didn't want to share my life really with anyone. I was very kind of not like sheltered, but just closed off to a lot of my friends, and it was hard to get to know me. So the fact that now I share on social media and with all my friends and with a bunch of strangers is just crazy. And it's been definitely a process. But yeah, old Denvyr would have been like, who is she?
are you proud of that continuum that you now seem to be on the other side of?
Yeah, I would say I'm really proud, for reasons that I was saying. It's just something that I was never exposed to, you know, dealing with stress, having other coping mechanisms for it, having coping mechanisms for anxiety, working on personal development and, sharing feelings with people, and just this whole other side that is a lot more subjective and is a lot more vulnerable. I never expected myself to be on this route, but here I am. And yeah, it's really eye-opening for me as I continue throughout the journey. And yeah, I would say I'm proud of where I'm at. Yeah.
A master of science in nutrition.
Yeah.
What do you plan on doing with that?
So right now it's a master's of nutrition with a professional concentration, or a concentration in professional practice. And so that is to become a registered dietitian. So right now I'm a sports nutritionist, but with a registered dietitian title, you can work in a clinical setting. You're able to treat people with chronic disease with food. So, I can't diagnose people with their medical conditions, but I can help address their conditions with that. And so that's the main difference. And it's nationally recognized. So that's what I'll be doing. And I finish this May. And so I'll be taking my boards after that. And then I plan to do, private practice. And there are some other options that I'm looking at, but yeah, that's kind of the plan.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Is there anything else that you think that I missed about your story that you wanted to promote? I can provide links in the show notes if you would like. If there's anything any cause you want to support, anything that you want linked to, any kind of resources that helped you or that you think could help others that are listening and resonating with your story.
Yeah, so I would say I always refer people to the intuitive eating book. Although it may not fix their problems, it's a really great place to start. Just for that awareness piece, we need to become aware of our current beliefs around food and our current behaviors before we can try to address them. So, intuitive eating is a really great place to start. You can buy it anywhere, it's on audiobooks. And then I don't have the Instagram handles for all the dietitians that I follow, but I can maybe send that to you later. But I would definitely suggest, following people on Instagram that you find their content to be helpful, not damaging. If you find yourself comparing to people, it might be a good idea to either mute their accounts or unfollow them, and just so you can really focus on that recovery piece and rebuilding your relationship with food.
And then your episode, I know that I said that it was coming out next week. So this Wednesday, it's actually coming out next Wednesday. So January 26th. And once that comes out, I'll get back to you. It'll be out on social media. If you could just send me a picture that you'd like to use for social, that would be great. You can either DM me on Instagram or email it to me like we've been scheduling.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that for sure. Yeah.
And then is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that you think that we missed before we go for today?
There's a million different things that I could talk about. But no, I think we covered a really solid base. Beliefs around food and your body, it's not your fault, and it really starts to develop as a young person. We're so impressionable at that age, and even though people are not saying things directly to you, the kind of language around body and food does take a toll in how you then have those behaviors. So it's not your fault, and recovery is possible, and it's a really great life when you can finally feel free around those things. So I suggest anyone who even remotely resonates with what I talk about, really try to investigate that side, because I know it sounds like very foo-foo and very subjective, but there is structure to it, and ultimately, like, it really benefits your mental health. So that's all I got.
That's why I asked that question at the end, because we've spent the whole hour with questions that I came up with. And then normally one of the best answers of the entire interview comes when I open the floor to the guests. And exactly that same thing just happened.
Yeah.
If there's anything else that you can think of that you wanted to add last minute before next Wednesday, you can just DM me anything that you wanted to add to the end. I won't start putting the narration together until Monday-ish. So if there's anything up to that point, you can send your picture in,
Okay.
And then I'll just get back to you next Wednesday once the episode is published.
Okay.
I hope you love it.
Yeah, I definitely will. Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome. And
no problem. Thanks for coming and hanging out and rehashing your experience with food. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, people can relive through my trauma, or not really, but like they'll find the good in my trauma. And then I always joke about that. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.